Had I been in the cutting room of Dune Part 1, here would have been my top 10 objective comments from the point of view of a working professional visual effects artist and an independent filmmaker, and my humble opinion how to fix them. Before I start, just be aware of spoilers ahead. If you haven't watched the film, just skip this video. You've been warned. I'm going to start with the opening shot, which is the Harkonnen Harvester. And in this shot, as you can see, it just pans from right to left. It is a little bit abrupt, and the first time I was watching it in theater, it was a little bit distracting. Maybe one of the reasons they did this was maybe it's through the lens of one of the Fremens that later on you'll see that's just looking at this harvester through binoculars, but I mean you don't see any heads of display. What I feel like is that this has been added later in post, and the curve that's been used was a little bit abrupt. So as you can see again, if I just play it back, you'll see that it just starts and ends like abruptly. So it was a little bit distracting for me, and because I feel like it's been added in post, I looked for a similar motion, and I found the famous Gom Jabbar scene that has kind of the same motion, a pan from screen right to screen left, and there's a little bit of motion in the space as well, but in general it's the same duration. So what I did is that I kind of extracted the same motion, the same curve, and applied it to that opening shot, and as you can see it feels a little bit more organic and it doesn't feel robotic, something that's actually, it doesn't belong to Dune world like a robot or something digital. So everything's like analog in Dune world, nothing is robotic, so that could have been done better. Talking about Gom Jabbar scene that I just extracted this motion, now I'm going to jump into the sequence where we see Paul letting go of his ego in a way and letting something within him to be awakened. And when you look at the reaction shots, like kind of the reverse shot of Paul, especially after this burnt hand, there is a hiccup. So as you can see before the shot before, you could see it is a little bit wide, but this shot, it feels like it doesn't belong to that progression. And when you look at all the shots, like all the reverse shots of Paul, you see that it just goes backwards. So that shot, it's really tight, because if you can look at the other shots, you see a little bit of pushing happening. So that's really tight. So I feel like that's one of the takes that was almost like towards the end of the action in a way. So the next shot, you'll see that it just goes back, and you see a little bit of trembling, and again, it doesn't show the progression happening. So I feel like the progression could have been done better, and what I did is that I just duplicated one of the previous shots and just put it there. So it's, first of all, it's not that tight, and at the same time it is still showing the progression, and as you can see it feels a little bit more natural, that eventually, like that shot and the next shot, you see a little bit of trembling and he's gaining control and something within him is being awakened, and finally like the end of the test. I'm pretty sure they've had enough coverage for him to be used and substitute that shot in specific. The next shot that I want to talk about is the Jessica's hand signal, and as you can see here, we see this woman in screen right and Jessica like the oval shoulder in screen left, and there's something called like 180-degree rule, and I think most of the people have heard of it. It's basically like the line of action that's happening in each shot usually shouldn't be broken. So basically, usually in conversations, you draw a line between two people, and you shouldn't be crossing it. But intentionally, directors do that. But here, I feel like it wasn't intentional because it needs to serve the story. But it's interesting because actually in the theater, when I was like watching it, the first couple of seconds when I was watching this, I got confused for a second, and then it cuts into this guard behind her, and you realize, okay, she's sending the signal to the guard, but in a way behind her, so it's her hand is kind of hidden from this woman in front of her. So I think that's why there was a little bit of limitation of the angle, so they wanted to just capture this hand signal from behind. But I feel like what could have been done is that this whole hand and everything could have been a little bit further to her back, and this whole body could have been here. So if we have it in this area, then we can have this woman in front of her could be in this area. In that case, we wouldn't be breaking the 180-degree rule, and still we're showing that she's doing it behind her to signal the guard behind her. I think it wasn't intentional. I think it was a limitation, and it wasn't serving the story, because again, it happens sometimes, like breaking the 180 rule. The next topic of mine is actually one of my favorite topics of this movie from like a visual effects point of view, which is the Ornithopters. And the Ornithopters, as you can see, and I'm pretty sure if you've seen some of the behind the scenes, are made practically, like especially the ones that are pretty close to the camera. And obviously, like this one is built, right? And actually, they made it like a Lego, so you can just remove pieces and just replace them with the camera, and they can just have any angle they want from the cameras. So what happens here? First off, I mean, again, the ones that are super close are practical, but the ones that are further away are like, obviously, you can't fly them, and especially the wings, those are added in post. But if I go forward, just look at it here. Like, if I go forward, you see that there's like a halo like around this edge, and in a way, this second Ornithopter is like flying next to this one in formation. It just grows, right? I mean, you see this is really thin, and then it grows. Like I go forward, like it grows like that. So I think that's a kind of a matte issue. So it's been added later. It's been tracked. It's been added later in post, but the matte wasn't perfect. That was like a tiny thing that I found. But the practical one of the beauty of using them is that they managed to use cranes and like suspending the whole structure, like the whole the Ornithopters. And what that gave them was, like, for instance, this shot that they're like just flying over this crawler being devoured by this humongous sandworm. You see this shadow, this shadow, or even some parts here, right? You see this is going to change because they're actually like rotating. So it makes sense, like the lighting is changing. You can see the shift of shadows. However, they didn't do that in this sequence in one specific shot. So you see like Leto, like he wants to dive, right? He does this, and it retracts the wings. And this shot, the whole thing, it could be in CG because there's no interactions. Usually you use practical ones when you're having like people interacting with them, or they're either actors are interacting with them, or they're super close to the camera. But I feel like this could be CG. But you see, as the dive is happening, this shift in shadow is happening as well, right? I mean, this line, as you can see, if I go a couple of frames back, I mean, this is like we have a harsh lighting, right? I mean, direct lighting, so there's like a harsh shadows happening. But the shot forward, as they're like leaning forward, I mean, nothing is happening here. I mean, just look at these shadows, like the direction of these. Nothing is happening here. And then here, interestingly, I think the reason for here is that I think they use like sand screen in here, like, but I mean, forward they change it, or maybe they I'm not sure. Maybe they actually filmed it like in the desert. But just look at the shadows and the highlights here, and I mean, you see like some shadows like here, or even the highlights. I mean, these are all of them are moving. So I think what they did, they actually like suspended the Ornithopter here, but they failed to do that in this shot that it's showing them. So a fix for this would be maybe like changing the edit and maybe cutting this piece, this shot into half, and first one is like just retracting the wings, and then cutting to that shot, and then cutting back, getting to dive position and seeing like the over shoulder, which is correct. Like they shot it actually with the shift in shadows. One more thing that was it was a mistake. The thickness of the landing gear. So as you can see, the thickness of the landing gear it looks to be not too thick, But this is one shot, and these are the ones that have I think they can carry like more than like 2 people, right? There are like 2 types. One is really small that can carry 2 people. But in other shots, I mean, one more shots, I found this to be thicker. I mean, you definitely can see this is the contact point. Maybe there were maybe wheels, and they did matte painting and removed the wheels and just extended this piece. Because again, the other thing is that when you have the practical one, it's not perfect. Sometimes maybe it's having some wheels or having some different pieces, and they do matte painting and they do cleanup and they remove them. I mean we as visual effects artists. But what happens here is that the shot before, when Duncan is getting off this, and at this point, you see like this looks like this is a contact shot. So this is what I feel like. So at this point, they're kind of referencing the one that I showed you before that was really not thick. And the other thing is that you see this like the ground, like there's this line, and it continues here, as you can see. Like it is a little bit hard to see, but it continues. So they did the cleanup or whatever they did here as if this is a shadow, which is wrong, because that's how I found this issue, was that okay, the shadows, like everything's like this shadow doesn't match the rest of the shadows, like that this direction. And I thought, okay, is this a shadow? Is this a piece? But again, I mean, the cleanup that was done, the matte painting that was done, as you can see, this piece, it's definitely done as if this is the contacting point. But let's just look where he lands his foot. But look at it, like he just put it here, as if this is the contact point of this piece, because they're really close. So this is definitely like a mistake, and it could have been easily avoided. Maybe they would have just worked as if this is the whole piece, or maybe they did extend this piece, not the parts that he's interacting with. He puts his foot here, but I mean, you can just do the rest, like do a matte painting and try to merge these two as if so this makes sense. Now I want to, like, after the Ornithopters, I want to talk about the lighting on the Bene Gesserit's ship, like the space shuttle, that it goes through the Highlander, that kind of tube, that like wormhole like spacecraft. So as you can see, like this is in a different point in space. Like they're like getting from their planet, or maybe they're coming from the Emperors. They're going to Caladan, right? And this is an entry point. So the highlights are like from here. This makes sense, and you see this highlight and this planet, and you know everything makes sense, right? And then it cuts here, and you still can see the same highlight happening here, right? And just take a close look at the highlight. It doesn't change at all. So at this point you feel like, okay, this is entering a tube, maybe it's around here, so it still makes sense, because you see the lighting from the other side is affecting this part, right? I mean, it's the rays are hitting this piece, then it's pitch black, right? I mean, it's black here, and then we see a little bit of ambient happening in this part that are like kind of lighting from this area. So basically these are two different points of space, right? I mean, this is Caladan, and that's another planet, right? So what happens is that, look at this highlight, this doesn't change. So if it goes through this long tube and it's pretty dark, and obviously, like, of course the lighting here might be the same as the lighting in this planet, both of them, maybe the sun here is hitting from this direction and here from this direction, that's fine. But at some points this highlight needs to be dimmed, needs to be toned down, but I mean, it doesn't, I mean, it's just constant. And maybe it was a request from the director that he really wants that the spaceship to be, especially in the cut, readable. But I feel like, I think that highlight could have been dimmed down, and at some points you feel like, okay, it's exiting the Highlander, and now that shows up. But it's always there. That's one thing. But now I'm going to jump into the whole scope of this movie, which is it was done beautifully. And one of the cleverest ways that it was done was through using human scale. For instance, these shots, you see this space, the shadow of these carriers, and you see here like humans like next to it, and how humongous these and the framing, as you can see, they fit this in the frame so you can see the people as well. And even some parts you can see that actually the director must have asked them to add these like fremens in this part of the mountains, so you can see this, how humongous this city is, right? So this is how it's been achieved, like by use of human scale. Even if you can't do that, for instance, these Highlanders are so huge that I think if you want to put a human next to it, I mean, you can't just put like in a spacesuit, but it would have been like maybe like half a pixel. I don't know. I mean, you wouldn't be able to see it. But in those cases, he's done it by using a proxy. You hold on, for instance, to this spaceship, and in the edit through the cut, you hold on to that proxy, and then you realize, oh, that's how big it is. And then when people are coming out of it, you realize, oh, wow, now it makes sense that the Highlander is humongous. So either it was done in the edit through a proxy, or it was done like next to each other. So why I'm mentioning this is that because they kind of failed to do so with the Sandstorm, because the Sandstorms are humongous in Dune world, but they failed to do that here. The only place you see like people next to the Sandstorm is this. So I mean, when you're closer to a subject, it adds more depth. But when you're further from subjects, they're more compressed. So for instance, the size of this guy, right? The size of this guy, it's almost the same size of these couple of dunes, right? So basically they feel the same size, right? But for instance, this dune and this dune, they feel the same because they are kind of the same size. So further they're more compressed, and they're naturally, you can see the difference. But when you shoot people from this close, they're humongous, and you see this, oh, I don't know, maybe it's not that huge, the Sandstorm. So a fix for this would have been like, maybe they could have just added in the opening shot of this that you see the Sandstorm, and you could see something like here and some people here. It could have been done easily with a matte painting. I don't know why they failed to show the scale of the Sandstorm and how humongous they are. That's one thing. The next comment is actually this scene, which the Duncan's sacrifice scene. And when he closes the door and you see Paul like obviously like rushing into the door, he hits the door, and you could feel that it's kind of like bouncing. And obviously it wasn't an actual like a hard piece because it was for the actors. I mean, you don't want them to hurt themselves, right? But I think this could have been, at least these bounces could have been fixed so it doesn't feel, it feels more rigid. Now it feels a little bit like a foam. And one more thing that helped this, that it doesn't feel rigid, is actually a sound effect. If you listen to it, I feel like a combination of removing these bounces and a better sound effects would have made this more painful for Paul. It's a painful moment, right? I mean, he's losing one of his like best friends, right? And he's like just trying to like open this gate, but he can't, right? I mean, maybe it's a subjective thing, but I feel like even the sound effects could have been done better, and removing those bounces, which is pretty easy. And you can work on the hand as well, so it wouldn't bounce and you feel a little bit more rigidness rather than it feels like a foam. So I have like 3 more comments. The thing that stood out to me in this shot was this shadow. I mean, whose shadow is this? I mean, initially I thought it could be Baron's shadow, and I thought, okay, in story-wise it makes sense. Sometimes you add shadows, I mean, especially for the villain, that serves the story. But this is actually this guard's shadow, and I don't think it's serving any stories. And actually, when you look at the close-up shot, you don't see that. Did you see that? I mean, the part that I talked about, the depth. You see they're like the same size, but like when you're pretty close to the subjects, yeah, they're like different sizes. So that's one thing. It's good to know. I feel like this could have been just removed, like this shadow. That's it. I mean, the next one is this shot, and I'll just give you a couple of seconds, or maybe you can pause the video and just tell me what, like composition-wise, what is wrong with this shot. It's this kind of rectangle, like perfect kind of rectangle, like a square is in the screen, and it was really bothering me. I'm pretty sure it was like a coincidence. I think there's this piece and there's another piece that were like forming this, but this has two issues. One is like kind of inviting your eye to go off screen because it's a really bright sprite. There's like too much contrast. And the other thing is like this perfect shape, which doesn't belong to the scene. This is like an organic scene, and the forms, and this is a perfect form. And this could have been easily fixed by either making it more organic, that what I did as a test, or completely removing it to quick solutions, because it's a locked camera as well. Now I get to the last scene, and my last comments. This shot, he warns Jessica to like just run for your life, right? The next shot, this blocking that was used, I would have chosen like this. This is Paul, and this is Jessica. I would have chosen reverse of that. So basically I would have changed, like, what is it the French would say, mise en scène. I would have changed this. I would have put Paul in the back behind, because in the next shot you'll see that Paul is falling behind, and he's obviously younger than his mother. And he should be more agile. He should be quicker. He should be faster. And later on, he trips, and the worm is almost like getting to him. But I feel like this could have been easily fixed. I mean, this is possible again. I mean, with a little bit of time to roto him. I mean, I don't have information. It is cropped. I think maybe there were more information from him, especially when he's exiting the frame. But I mean, he could have been even in post. This could have been fixed, that we have him rotoed and we put him back, because basically you can act this as a sand screen and just put him back and just recreate pieces of her and then put her in front. And then it would have made sense for him to fall behind and just kind of trip, and then almost getting eaten by the worm. And my last comment, like again in the same scene, is the Sandworm, the Shaykhulu. It's actually Shaykhulu, not Shaykhulu, because it's Arabic. Shay means thing in Arabic. My mother tongue is Persian, but we have common words. And khulu means eternity, thing of eternity. And the one other meaning that they had, I think, in the book, was like the old man of the desert. You hear that line when he's close to that crawler, and he says like, "I can hear your footsteps, old man." And it has a double meaning. He's saying it towards Gurney as well, because in the training he was like calling him like old man. The whole movie is like, it has like deeper meanings, especially in the dream sequences. It has a deeper meaning, and then a kind of something on the surface. I got sidetracked. This close-up, it looks is humongous, like the sandworm, the Shaykhulu. But when it gets here, I mean, especially the mouth, just look at it. So these are kind of like, I would say, I think these are like, you can call these like lips, right? I mean, each lip, I think it's like a hexagon or something, like the shape. But just look at this, like in relationship to him. This is humongous, I mean, compared to this shot. And given the fact that this shot, they knew it's going to be like an iconic scene, I think they could have just done a better job of matching these two shots. I'm sure it was a request from the director to make this humongous in the close-up, so I think it was forgiving to do that on the body as it's rising from the sand, because to show these giant scales, right? I think that was fine, but I think for the mouth, it doesn't feel like it's the same. So these are like the same, almost like the same lips that I mentioned. And when you put these next to each other, you see that it doesn't match, and it's almost like double. So it could have been done better. That was my last comment talking about the sandworm. I hope you enjoyed this video and kind of agreed to some of my objective comments to some extent. Now I feel kind of nostalgic, and I want to go play the Atreides campaign from Dune 2. So yeah, let's just go harvest some spice.